Okay, moving on to the memory models. There are two that we need to know for A-Level. Now just be careful because up here it says it's for A-Level only. So remember, if you sit in the AS exam, you don't need to know memory models. Okay, the first one we're going to look at is Atkinson and Schrin's multi-store memory model. The multi-store memory model is an information processing model, and it's laid out really nicely. In a nutshell, you get an input, which is all the environment. You have the central processing system, which is your brain, and the output is the movement that you're going to get. It's a bit like a computer. If I wanted to type in what is the world record for the 400 metre race in the Olympics, for example, I'd input it in my keyboard, Google would process it, and it'd throw out my answers. You put it in a sporting context, you have the input of the environment and all the things that are involved with that. Your brain processes what response that should be given, and then the output would be the movement. Selective attention is essential to this model, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. And it relates both to learning and performing physical activities. So you have a look at this. Now, one of the best things about this model is the way it's laid out. So if we take each one in turn, we're going to start with the input. Now, sometimes you don't actually see this part, but it's important to understand why it's there. So the input is a detection of cues or data from the environment. So in the water polo example, is everything that's going on. Teammates, opponents in the water polo, it could be the water rippling, it could be the crowd. Absolutely everything that's going on in that environment is detected. Now, the way we detect things is by our sensory organs or receptors, some key words that you want to get in there. So the senses that we know are eyes, vision, auditory with our ears, and proprioceptors, the touch and the kinesthesis. They're really important to understand how we pick up our input. The information then moves into the sensory memory, sometimes called the short-term sensory store, which is in here. Okay, on here it says a sensory memory. You might see it as a short-term sensory store, the STSS. This receives all information for whatever's going on here in the environment. It all comes into here, and the capacity is unlimited. But the downside is it only lasts up to 1 second. Now it selects only the relevant information and filters out the irrelevant information. This is called selective attention. So we only want the stuff that's important. So if I used the water polo goalkeeper, for example, you'd have all the input going on, and it all comes to memory, the short-term sensory store. Now in here we want to forget about the crowd. We want to maybe forget about some strikers up the front there that doesn't, it's got nothing to do with what the most important thing is, which is the ball. Okay, so selective attention, we get rid of all the irrelevant stuff and focus on the most important things. If the information is selected and attended to, it passes to the short-term memory, which is here. So if we give things some attention, it's going to get through to the short-term memory. If we don't give it any attention, it's going to be forgotten or lost. So if you think about stages of learning, if you have the cognitive stage of learning, they tend to pick up on everything and try to process all these things. Now, if you take a top athlete, take Johnny Wilkinson, for example, when he kicked that goal to win the World Cup, the only thing he was focusing on was the relevant cues, which was catching the ball and kicking it between the posts. He wasn't interested in the crowd, TV cameras, or anything like that. It was purely focused on the relevant information. So once the selective attention has occurred here with this arrow, you can then pass on to short-term memory. Or you can call it the STM. Now in here, you've got two things that could happen. It's either the recall, which is the retrieval from the long-term memory. The recall, coming back from the long-term memory, or the response, where we're trying to get it into the long-term memory. So it's a bit of a two-way process. You're either digging out old memory and bringing it in, or you're trying to get new stuff to go into it. So this is sometimes called the working memory. It receives the information from the short-term sensory store, which is over here. And the capacity can hold 7 items plus or minus 2. So it can hold maybe 5 to 9. It'll hold that information for 30 seconds and only stored if it's rehearsed. So if we don't rehearse things, it's not going to get stored in your long-term memory. So think about the things that you want to work on. Make sure you're practicing the information that is most important. Now here the information is perceived or interpreted For example, the relevance of a goalkeeper's position in the water polo. The short-term sensory memory is versatile. Auditory information can be visualised, so verbal guidance can be used. So what you need to get your head into here is that the short-term memory, if we're trying to get things into long-term memory, it needs to be rehearsed over and over again, just the relevant cues. We can also, in here, if we get a situation, so the goalkeeper's on a one-on-one and he's done it before, he can go into his long-term memory and pull out the desired outcome or the output, which he might have done in training. So you've got to think of it as a two-way process. Okay, moving on to long-term memory. This receives the rehearsed information from the short-term memory, for example, the water polo shot. Now, it's really important that you understand that it only gets through here if it's rehearsed. The capacity is unlimited and the duration is permanent. So if you think about that when you've learnt to walk or run or ridden a bike, it is permanent. You can't get rid of it. It's unlimited. Okay, so you can keep taking more and more and more. The longer the information is stored in long-term memory, the stronger the memory trace becomes. Retention is improved through chunking. So hopefully you've looked at chunking, but the definition is different pieces of information can be grouped or chunked together and then remembered as a piece of information. Right, so if I said to you, remember a phone number, you probably remember it in 3 different chunks rather than one big piece. The stored information is retrieved by the short-term memory for recall or response. So let me go through it. I'm going to use a cricket example. Okay, the ball goes up in the air. The player is getting all the input from the environment coming in. He's got the wind, he's got the crowd, he's got the ball, he's got the sound of the bat, he's got the sound of his teammates shouting, catch it. All these things are being picked up by his receptors. Everything goes into the sensory store, where it's unlimited. So now he's only going to try and focus on what is important, which hopefully selective attention appears now. So he's going to ignore the crowd, he's going to ignore the music playing, and he's going to focus on hopefully the cricket ball coming down. So we get to short-term memory. Now, this catch that he's about to take, he's thinking, have I done this before? And if he has done this before in training, all he's going to do is use the retrieval. He's going to go into his long-term memory. He's going to pull out the motor program that he's done before, and it's going to go to his working memory, and he's going to take the catch. If he hasn't taken his catch before, okay, and he needs to get it into his long-term memory, okay, so he's going to rehearse it and practice over and over again to try and get this long-term memory feeling into there. So it's a two-way process. All right, so your long-term memory, let's say he has taken his catch before, okay, he learnt it maybe 10 or 15 years ago because it's permanent, okay, he's going to pull it out and he's going to pop it into his working memory and he's going to get the desired outcome. Remember, think about a computer. Input, the processing of Google, okay, and then in here we've got the output. Right, that is Atkinson and Schrin's multi-store memory model. What I'd like to do now is pause it and try and use an example of your favourite sport and talk yourself through it. All right, so you've had a go at that. Have a look at the model. I've put you in a working example. I don't want to. I'm not going to talk you through this one, so I'd like you to have a read through this and make sure you're happy. Now, I've used the best sport, cricket, for you to have a read through, okay, and see if you can get that in your long-term memory, okay. So remember, what I'm trying to do is trying to get everything into here for you, long-term memory, and you get rehearsal is one way it will get there. So it's a way of you practicing all this information, and hopefully we'll get into long-term memory. So when we see that exam question in the summer, okay, you can just dip into it and pull it out and pop it on your exam paper. Okay, we'll move on to Kraken-Lockhart's level of processing. This approach is used to explain how memory works, and it opposes the view that there are set memory stores like we looked at in the previous model. It seeks to explain what we do with the information rather than how it's stored. According to this approach, meaning of information is more relevant than repetition. So with this one, it's saying the more meaningful understanding you have of a situation or a skill, the more chance you're going to remember it rather than repetition of practice. The information received by the brain will be transferred into long-term memory and remembered if it is considered, understood, and has meaning. And I'm going to go through this a little bit more. So how the information is considered is called the depth of processing. The deeper the information is processed, the longer the memory trace will last. Now, as recalling what we know about memory trace, this is when the brain cells retain or store information. Okay, and obviously we want a strong memory trace. Okay, the brain cells retaining as much information as possible. So if we look through the example we've got on here, okay, so if we're looking at the 3 levels of understanding for this model, we've got structural level, okay, which is looking at the shape or the flight of the football. Okay, let's use football for an example. You see its flight, you can see its speed, it might have some spin on it. That's called the structural processing. If we just leave it there, you're only going to get a short-term and shallow memories. Okay, this is actually not that good if we just leave it there. Okay, if we try to understand what noise this ball is making, so maybe when it came off the foot of the person kicking it to you, okay, the noise it made and the sound, you might just be able to pick up more information, which would help us to try and get it processed. But again, it's only going to be shallow processing. Okay, this is called phonetic processing, right? So it's looking at the noise that it makes. So the shallow processing comes from what Crack and Lockhart have called maintenance rehearsal. Okay, and this will just result in shallow processing. A weak memory trace, remember that is the brain cells being able to retain or store information. And it's, as a sports performer, shallow processing is something we don't really want to focus on. It's the deep processing that we want to focus on mainly. So they have suggested that that this comes about by understanding the meaning of the stimulus or the group of stimuli. So the main thing here is understanding the meaning. So how the stimulus relates to previously stored stimuli. So the player might have experienced a similar flight before, so then he can recall any information that is done in the past. And the importance of the stimulus, now that's the key part. If they understand how important that stimulus is, okay, the more chance it's going to get in the deep processing part of the brain. So you could work on maybe you're on one-on-one with the goalkeeper, and the importance is if you score here, you're going to win the game, or scoring the goal. Again, using this one, the flight of the ball has been giving you a goal-scoring opportunity. Okay, and there's more chance of you remembering this skill because it's got meaning to it. You understand what's going on. If you did maybe rock climbing, and you would understand. If you're working on a particular move, you might say, look, the importance of this is if you do get it wrong, you're going to fall. And that'll give a deeper processing of that information. The deep processing comes from what Crack and Lockhart called elaborative rehearsal. Okay, and deep processing results in a strong memory trace being formed, and long-term retention of information can help future performance. So whilst you're thinking about the 2 memory models, maybe having a look at how to try and get the deep processing going, giving some meaning. Now, there are some advantages and some disadvantages of this particular model. The advantage is it explains that if we understand information, we are more likely to remember it. Yeah, good point. And explains that the longer we consider and analyse information, the more we will remember it. So maybe looking at trying to analyse past performances or past skills that you've done. If you analyse it, there's more chance you can remember it. The disadvantages of Crack and Lockhart's level of processing model: the longer it takes to process the information does not always lead to better recall. I'm sure you've tried to learn something and you've done it over time and time again and you still can't get it into your long-term memory. So this doesn't necessarily agree with that. It is difficult to know what deep processing actually involves. Okay, even though it says to have meaning, okay, it's difficult to know what deep processing actually involves and what you have to do. And it does not take into account individual differences. So this is just a very generic, it's not actually telling us about how different people can maybe be different. Okay, then just looking at the very last bit. Okay, up here we've got the deep processing, the longer lasting memories, recognising and understanding the meaning of the stimulus. So in this example, if he misses that ball, okay, he's going to get out. So it's very important that he learns this shot, okay, and gets that motor program, that skill in his long-term memory, because the meaning is if he misses it, he's going to get out. And down here is recognising the physical, the sensory features of the stimulus, seeing the shapes and hearing the sound. So you might see it all, you can process it, what it's going to do off the pitch. The flight path has all been processed. However, you don't know the meaning of what would happen if you missed it. Okay, this results in shallow processing with shorter lasting memories. Okay, just take a moment, maybe just pause that and have a look. Okay, just a few questions for you then. I want you to sort of have a go at these questions and maybe have a little research on the answers, maybe get your textbooks or your workbooks. Okay, so question 1, very simply, what are the 3 key features of a multi-store memory model? Okay, so 3 features. Three features of the multi-store memory model. Okay, that's the first one looked at. Question number 2, what is memory trace? Alright, and then the third question is how can you make memory processes more effective when learning and performing skills? Okay, so I'm going to say that again because I probably can't fit it in that space. Okay, how can you make memory processes more effective when learning and performing skills? So hopefully you understand which one that is looking at. So I'd like to go back over that. Okay, if you didn't understand it, just rewind this a little bit and have a go at those 3 questions and then have a research of what is the answers. At the end of that, that concludes the skill acquisition part of the course, and I'm going to set you now, probably next video, is some exam questions and some summaries to have a go at. Alright, thanks.